specialize in music most people hate. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out our Facebook page, Instagram, and our website. Let us share the noise with you.
Yo, this is John from Dosage Media, and this episode is brought to you by Begrudgingly Benny. Interested in putting something horrific and grotesque on your next piece of merch? Benny is tucked away in the fiery depths of COVID quarantine, blasting the filthiest of old school death metal and drawing hideous creatures that he is waiting for you to adopt. Go over to Instagram and follow at BegrudginglyBenny and contact him if you would like some really weird original art for your band or label. Super professional, highly recommended.
There it is. Scott, how we doing?
What's up, buddy? Thanks for having me.
So, right off the bat, I'm going to hit you with a hard question.
Go for it.
So, if you had one motivational book or like speech that has really like made an impact on like your podcast, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, one book that I really appreciate is, Gary Vaynerchuk. This dude just crushes it. His book Crushing It is remarkable, and I'd have to say, just Jab Jab Right Hook is a phenomenal book. A lot of the other books that I read are more business centered, but I think the Jab 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 Right Hook was top notch for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you, have you ever read the book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff?
No, I have not. No. No.
It's really freaking good. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Yeah.
But it's killer. It's
one of the biggest forms of consumption for me, love books, but podcasts is where it's at. I mean, obviously we're on one, and I'm a little jaded having a podcast for the last 2 years, but you can be driving, mowing the lawn, walking, doing whatever, right? Like it's just so convenient.
I was curious. I'm like, I wonder if he reads books. Like,
yeah,
with all the ideas with your podcast, like you have so many episodes like with different topics.
Yeah,
I'm like, where does this guy like get his influences or ideas from?
So I listen to my audience just a ton. I listen to you guys, right? So I always think it's super funny in business or just content creation. A lot of people come to this place of let's just push out something to push out something. And I think even some musicians do it, right? But when you change the mindset of what do people want? What do they want to hear? Where are their troubles? And I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like selling, right? Especially with a sales team. There's this idea you walk through the front door and it's all of a sudden just sell, sell, sell. And it's like, well, what if you're on the other side of that every single day, right? You're a consumer. So just keep your consumer hat on. And then everything else is just so secondary. So I think it's the same thing with just podcast material in general. Where I come up with my ideas is I just listen to my audience. Every single day, people are sending me DMs like, hey, I'd love to hear this. Or I would say most of them are, hey, I'm in this situation. How do I get out of it? Or how do I transition away from it? Or how do I kind of bust through it? And so after a while, when you get 10 of those, 15 of those, 20 of those, you're like, okay, if this is what people are asking and there's some kind of dark area here for people, there's a little bit of unknown. Why don't I just push out a podcast if this is what people are asking about? So all of my episodes come from what people are asking, and then I just build content based on what people want. So yeah.
I want to congratulate you, man. 1 million streams.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Now for me, I go through Buzzsprout. Did you get an email or like what was your initial reaction to that?
So I push all my content through Simplecast, and actually I just had a conference call with Anchor today because they want to pull me away from.
They just emailed me.
Yeah. So, what was my initial reaction? 1 million is remarkable, and I'm thinking about 2 million now, and then I'm going to be thinking about 3 million. So it's always that next thing, I think, for me, and that's just always the way my brain's worked. I was excited, but it wasn't because of the number 1 million. It means that I had 1 million impressions on people, and that's what's more important to me. Like, John, for example, you out of the blue, like DMing me and being like, hey, listen to the podcast. And that's actually what, got me to start mine. That's more what I'm worried about, right? If there was, at the end of the day, I talk to a lot of other podcasters and they're always like, well, I'm trying to get this up. I'm trying to go here. And it's like, well, why are you really doing it? Like the numbers are cool. Don't get me wrong,
Right,
but
for sure.
but what's more just fucking amazing is actually impacting someone's life. Like that's it. And so if it was 10,000, great. And sure, like, listen, I was super stoked when I hit the 1 million mark, right? But at the end of the day, the thought wasn't it's because of the number, it's because of the lives behind the numbers. And that's what I try to look at when I'm just looking at podcast data in general. It's like,
Right.
okay, if 50% of my audience is out of the United States, whatever the number shake out to be, it's all about how am I changing people's lives? And that's what I'm more worried about.
Right. Yeah, I think the coolest thing with Buzzsprout is like you can identify where the people are listening, and for me it's more like not real. I mean, US is like the majority, but Europe.
Yeah.
Everybody in Europe loves podcasts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not
It's
sure if
well,
that's a music thing or just in general. Like,
yeah, so it's a great question. I'm not sure what the answer is. United States is top for me, and coming in a close, I shouldn't say close second, but a second is the Philippines. All of a
yeah,
sudden, it's blown up. Last time I looked at Chartable, as of yesterday or the day before, is a number one. It was a number 5 podcast trending right behind TED Talks, which was pretty amazing. And then as far as charts in the United States, I think I've gotten up as high as like 24, 22 in mental health podcasts in that category. So, and that means a lot because at the end of the day, I started the podcast in October 14th or 15th in 2018. And what was a huge inspiration for me behind the podcast was 5 years ago in December, my best friend took his life. And it was like a year and a half I spent just like being like, how come I didn't see
well,
this dude's
yeah,
pain? And, being his best friend, how did I not realize these things? And, at the end of the day, it came to this place of I'm looking in the wrong areas. I'm looking backwards. What I really need to do is amplify my voice forward and figure out a platform that I can do that on. And so
right.
that's what really attracted me and inspired me at the end of the day to start the podcast. Because the reach
That's
is just
crazy.
far.
That's crazy you said that because like I had the same thing happen to me. I didn't know that about you, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Yeah.
I had a friend do that. Probably my best friend for sure 4 years ago. So
Hmm.
it's one of
Yeah.
those things that like it's growing and I hate it. Like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is going to sound really weird to say. So a couple of things. First, that I've been trying to I want to expose myself more on the podcast and even on just my social media channels because I think what's kind of transpired over the last 15, 20 years, however long you want to call it, is that everybody's given like highlight reels all the time.
mm,
Whether it be just influencers, celebrities, musician, whatever it is. And I think that that's just a bunch of garbage, right? There's so much more to it. There's so much like, meat to it. And so one of the things that I really want to set out and do is actually have more of those discussions on my podcast and even social media because I think a lot of people that I engage with actually think that I'm a fucking robot. And I'm like, listen, I have my shitty days. Trust me. Like
right.
I preach like positivity and motivation and like all of this, like go forward and continue to bust through walls. But at the end of the day, I'm real, right? Like I'm a human. Like I have my tough days. It's how you actually push through those days, whether it be an inch or a yard, right? And that's what I'm really trying to discuss at scale. And that's where I really want people to get. But and the second part of that is my best friend passing, it was also just an awakening for me, right? Like because I feel prior to that, I was just kind of like walking through things and walking through life, and this was a thing that certainly blindsided me to open up my eyes. And so at the end of the day, certainly if I could take it back, of course, but it is what it is now, right? It's written in stone, it's in the history books, and it's what now how I use that for good moving forward. So in a way, it was certainly life changing, I know for a lot of people around him. So
Damn. I didn't.
Yeah.
That's perfect, man. Well, obviously it's not a
I get what
great
you're saying.
story, but
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
taking the really negative shit and making it a positive. And
Yeah.
for me, like my friend that passed away, he was a musician, so like I'm talking to people that he would have wished to talk to, and I'm like, shit, man. Like it's just you only have so many hours in the day, and it's
Yeah.
like you got to use it.
Yeah.
But the one question I had, you talk about hours in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So say you didn't have to like go to sleep at night. You had the extra hours. What would you do at that time?
I would do exactly what I'm doing now.
Yeah,
Um,
just more of it.
yeah, and I don't think I would. I'm really, I hate the word content because I think that the word content means that you're not striving for any more, right?
Uh,
That you're like, okay, I'm fine with things, and I think everybody has a little bit of a variation on that definition, but I wouldn't change up a goddamn thing. I put energy into things that are going to give me an ROI beyond dollar. So for
Mhm.
me, how I justify ROI, my return on my investment, is way beyond the monetization, right? Like how much time I put into the podcast every single week,
Right.
it's
Right.
irrelevant the dollars that I get back on it. It's the impact that I make. So it's the same thing on what I'm working on outside of the podcast. I just would expand my hours on it. I'm up at 5:30 every day and I pop out of
Yeah.
goddamn bed like I'm on fire and I just have a lot of energy. My girlfriend's like, dude, you're
Go
fucking
to bed.
crazy. I don't understand. And then, it's the same thing up until like 11 o'clock where I'm just go, go, go. I have this thing. I'm restless at night, and I'm restless at night because I wish there were more hours in the day. But I also know that that's not healthy. Like I need, some sleep at the end of the day. So if I did not have to sleep, I would expand on what I'm currently doing. I think there's actually a crazy statistic. I think it's under 15% of the US population actually wakes up prior to the sun coming up. So for me, if I didn't have to sleep, but other people had to sleep, oh hell, I'd go wild because I know that other people aren't working. So imagine what that does over the course of a lifetime. And
Yeah.
that's the concept behind people actually waking up really early. I think Mark Wahlberg's up at like 4:30 or 3:30, something ridiculous. But his
Right.
thought behind that is everybody else is sleeping. So imagine over the course of my life how much more progress I'm going to have over those that are sleeping until 8:30, 9:30, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, with me, like coming up with questions, I know it takes a lot of time. I
Mhm.
do it at night, and I'm just curious on like, so you're most productive in the morning, is what you're saying,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
and that's how long does it usually take you to do these podcasts? Because like me, I can kind of feed off energy. You, it's just like you're in the moment. You're just kind of going off of like, you know, I, I'm just curious on if you list like bullet points and kind of go as things come to mind, or
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So, it's crazy. So, I specifically have short episodes. And the reason behind that is because the average commute for a US citizen is roughly 25 minutes. So I
yep,
always wanted to keep my episodes under 25 minutes. Now, we all know, especially in the podcast world, interviews always surpass that. Like there's no way you're getting a good interview in within 20 minutes, right?
right,
So that's part number 1. For 20 minutes of content, I at least have to have 7 pages of content down. And
and
the
that
reason
yeah,
for that is that yes, I'm an off the cuff type person. I actually like lack of preparation because one, it feels more natural, and I just think there's a lot of discovery in that. But the other part in why I prep 7 pages for each piece of each episode is because I really want to think it through.
Yeah,
like being spontaneous is great, but really diving deep into it. And I find moments where I could just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. But at the end of the day, it's something I also preach is this: just throw perfection out the door. Fuck it. Nobody cares. Like, just push out stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, it takes me about 7 pages of content and really, I would say about 4 to 5 hours of preparation prior to a podcast, irrelevant if there's an interview going on, right?
Wow.
And that's actually something that I've pulled away from. When I started the podcast, it wasn't so much interviews, and now I'm starting to get more into interviews. And that's because people are reaching out and saying, hey, would love to be on the podcast. Or I had a buddy that, was listening to you and suggested that I reach out because I also have a podcast, want to hop on. So yeah, it takes a bit of time.
It's it's definitely one of those things. People just want to look at the end product or listen to the end product, and it's like there's so much more to it. Like,
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that I dive into is like, when you listen to an album by an artist,
Mhm.
you don't know like half the crap that's going on in the background, like personalities of people, like, you know, what gear they use, like all just tiny stuff that
Mhm.
people just don't look at. I
Yeah.
love talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I think it's awesome talking about it too, because, people have a higher appreciation. It's like art, right? Music, art, or like physical, like artwork, right? There's so much energy and time that goes behind it, but that's where it's all irrelevant, just like the download numbers we were talking about earlier. If one person reaches out to me and is like, dude, I just quit my job because I was fucking miserable, and my parents were like the ones that kind of convinced me to do this thing, and I was really good at art, and I decided to do that, and I just got, I don't know, 20 or 50 people to buy my shit like that. I read these things and I like almost seriously like tear up. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I had a woman reach out to me, I think I posted on Instagram a while ago, who was a nurse, and she was driving, I think, to work. And she, being a nurse, felt that she was about to pass out, and she felt really weak, and she was about to come to an intersection. So she pulled down this alley and she did pass out, and she hit the side of the building head on. And she was on the phone, conveniently enough, with her mother being like, hello. And of course she panicked. And so she talked to obviously a couple of doctors, and she had like severe dehydration. She was extremely stressed, and everybody was like, hey, you need to go to therapy. You need to go to therapy. You need to go to
no,
therapy.
she just needs to get a new job, like something
Yeah,
different.
right. And so she actually ended up finding the podcast and started just listening to it, and completely changed things with her life. And she's like, Scott, you literally saved my life. And I think it was a long DM. So I asked her, hey, can I share this? Because you're going to help out so many people. And so I threw it up on Instagram a while ago. But it's shit like that I read, and I get to the end and I'm like this close, like in tears, just because, again, that's what I mean. The million that meant shit in the grand scheme of things. Like, the fact that I was able to impact someone's life, one, makes me just extremely grateful and just humbled to know that like anybody can do that stuff with a microphone,
Yeah, I was
with
just about to
music,
say.
like whatever, like that shit. That's what's so special. And music is a great fucking example of impacting people's lives.
Right. Anytime my sister like touches my mic, I'm like, do not touch that, because like, dude, like, you don't know, like,
Yeah.
it's what the power of a microphone can do in this day and age.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
even have to like be in front of millions of people.
Yep.
So off topic of like music, what do
Sure.
you listen to?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Again, I listen to way more podcasts than anything. If I'm going on a long trip, I'm actually binging
Now
podcasts.
is that all motivational podcasts or like
Business usually.
you said
So,
okay.
yep. So one of my favorite podcasts actually right now, and I think they do a remarkable job, is My First Million. So there's a daily newsletter that comes out called The Hustle, and it just has nothing but just business updates, and they do a really good job putting it together. There's no like politics or bullshit in it. It's like straight up business, and they're very unique companies that they highlight. And so what these two do on the podcast is they literally just go back and forth with business ideas that they thought of. They must have like a Google Drive, and they just talk about those business ideas. And they also bring on some big names, like the CEO of Spotify was on the other week. So I binged the hell out of that. Robin Hood, the investment app has a podcast I listen to, Gary's Vaynerchuk's podcast. I listen to that every so often. For music, man, I'm just like a spectrum of a music guy. I literally listen to anything. You name it. Like back in the day in high school, it could have been
Yeah, let's hear the high
fucking
school playlist.
like in back in the day in high school, it could have been like Jack Johnson to fucking Atreyu. No lie. It was just every spectrum because it all depended the mood I was in. I never. Here's the other thing. I don't follow artists, not because I don't appreciate what they do, but because I've got so much other shit going on. I really don't care what Jack Johnson had to fucking eat that yesterday. Like, the TMZ type stuff. I'm not into that. I mean, even with movies and stuff, I couldn't name a
I will
fucking
not watch TV.
yeah. Like I can name a few like I did earlier, Mark Wahlberg, but like at the end of the day, I don't follow that stuff. And again, it's not because I don't appreciate the work they put into their stuff. I get it. Like it's a ton of work. Yeah, I don't honestly, I have an Amazon device in my studio, so I'm not going to say her name, but I just ask her to shuffle my Pandora stations all the time. It's never like I'm sitting down. I need though, the one thing I will say when I'm working, I can't have a podcast going because
I feel that.
I have to give my attention 110% of my attention to the podcast to really like suck up the value. So I normally will, like I said, shuffle my Pandora stations and just listen. And same thing with like Spotify too as well.
Anything with voice, it's tough. Like anytime I'm doing any type of work on a computer,
Yep.
having some type of voice in my head, I can't like. I don't know. They got to be separate. It's got to be like instrumental music or just something else.
Yep. A fun little tidbit too. When I'm in the shower, I listen to podcasts. Like I have to because for me, my think tank is the shower.
Yeah,
Like,
just sitting there for like an hour.
and it's funny, there's like this joke that like women like scorching hot fucking showers. No, like I love it like flaming fucking hot where my skin's going to boil off. I don't know what it is, and it's almost kind of relevant. It could be peak summer here, like July or whatever, and I'll still have a scorching hot shower. There's something about, for me, like activating just the brain a little bit more. And so if I have the podcast going, I'm paying attention, and I'll like rip my cell phone into the shower and like start typing on my notes with an idea that I had.
Right.
So that's also some inspiration too for the podcast as well. I something just clicks when I'm in the shower, and I immediately have to grab my cell phone and like jot down the idea on my notepad. Like,
I never thought like how much time I spend like in the shower just thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's probably one of my like, I don't, other than nighttime, right before I go to bed and in the shower.
Yep.
Like pacing back and forth in the shower thinking about something.
Yep. The other one for me, which hasn't happened as much obviously with COVID, is driving. What I'll find is I'll be consuming a podcast or shifting between a couple. I literally hit pause and I like digest it. Think about it for a second. What does that mean? And how could I deploy that in my life? Is it going to better my life? What does this all look like? What's the long term? And then I get back into it. Like that's one of, I think a blessing and a curse for me is my brain never shuts off. It will keep me awake. It will wake me up. I'm just always going. But I love that. I do.
Is that do you have any coffee addictions?
No, man, I'm wicked big on this. 2 cups of coffee is my max, so I'll probably finish up like my first cup by like 9:30. 2 cups is my max, and then I down water throughout the day. I'm not a energy drink person. It's water and coffee for the most part, and tea. Like literally, those are my piece of fuel. I just naturally energetic. I mean, I got my first job at 14 and just worked my damn face off, continue to, and will until the day I die. I probably will never retire because that's what I know. That's what I enjoy. And I normally, there's this idea, and I have executive coach that came on the podcast that's going to air next week. Her name's Joanne, and something that we touched upon is a lot of people are like, geez, why don't you slow down? And it's like, listen, you're thinking about this scale of just hustle when you're doing something you're miserable at doing, right? Or doing. For me, I'm not miserable with what I do. So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like work to me, because the ROI, what I was talking about earlier, is happiness, is fulfillment, right? So it doesn't feel like I'm putting in 80 hours a week on this stuff.
Right.
That's
Right.
not between like the podcast, two companies, like that doesn't bother me. Like those things don't, it doesn't seem like that. Don't get me wrong. At the end of the day, yeah, I'm fucking tired. Again, I'm a human, but like it doesn't feel like I'm tired working something that I absolutely hate.
Right. For sure.
So,
So the next thing I wanted to touch upon is like besides the podcast, is there any like activities or practices that you do on the daily that keeps you on the path other than the podcast itself and like working?
yeah. So 30-minute reflection every single day. It doesn't need to be longer than 30 minutes. And the opportunity for me is my life is surrounded by speed. So it allows me to be honest with myself and slow down a little bit. And I think I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast, but it seems there's a little bit of irony in stepping away to actually
Mhm.
move forward. But I
Right.
think what happens to a lot of us, we are just overwhelmed with just stimulation every day, social media, news, world event, whatever, right? And that on top of just go, go, go for me, I need the 30 minutes to just snap out of everything. So I don't consume the news. I don't, the only thing I really focus on social media is either business related or just, mindfulness material around there. So for me, it's 30 minutes to actually just sit with myself in silence. How am I feeling? What are my emotions telling me today? And I think we've masked this, we've put this kind of blanket over it that if you sit that way, you must be like a bitch, right? And I think there's
Right.
also this idea of being like emotional and being open, and we, especially like men, I think have taken the brunt, at least on this one, in that you can't show emotions, right? You
You
like,
can't.
what are
You can't.
feelings? Like those are gross. Stay the fuck away from them. And again, another hope of mine is to be able to change that. And so 30 minutes sitting down, if I'm overwhelmed or I'm sad or whatever, it allows me to actually sit there and feel that for a second. Because if I didn't, I would be using the things that I'm doing on the daily as escapism. And I don't want that, because then they start to turn into something that I don't want it to be and that I can't have it be. So I'm really, really keen on 30 minutes self reflection. How do I feel? What are my emotions telling me? What's most important, and what do I need out of today? And
Right.
that changes every single day, right? The ratio changes on what I'm doing and what I need to do. And I think it's just accepting that through that process.
The one thing I listened to, well, that I keyed into when listening to your podcast is like you said something about writing down your goals. And if you don't write them down, you don't actually make them into reality. And I'm like, that's really freaking smart. Cause
Mhm.
like I've had that happening where I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go to the gym more. And then I just forget about the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like I printed this thing, like this poster out for my podcast just to remind me, like, dude, do it. Why
hmm
not? Like, I don't know. Sometimes you just need a reminder, I feel like.
100%. I have a giant whiteboard off to my right, massive fucking whiteboard. And it has reminders on it all the time. Not only that, throughout as you walk down my basement and into the studio, there's nothing but posters like "You got this," like "Go kick ass," like all of these things are just extra reminders. I'm I'm I don't necessarily need them, but they're really good kind of background noise for me. And 100%, I have goals not only on a Google Drive, but I have them on like I said, the whiteboard. Another great thing that I do is goal setting's great. Understanding what your macro and micro goals are in order to get you there is remarkable. But something that I've faced over the years too is, because I go, go, go all the time, you got to make sure to look back at base camp a few times, right? Because that gives you the appreciation and the perspective that I was there, and it gives you fuel to promote that forward growth even more. So,
Right.
what I mean by that is you could have 6 goals, and it could feel like you're chasing those 6 goals and hitting all your micro goals along the way too. But if you don't sit down and actually spend some time reflecting and saying, holy shit, that was back in February, and I've been able to accomplish like these things. That's remarkable. So something that I also have beyond that is an achievement document on Google Docs that I constantly update on a monthly basis. Just take a look how, and those things don't need to be a physical thing. Like I started a podcast, like it could be something such as I'm happier, right? Or I feel less shitty. Like that is an accomplishment in itself. And so I think that that's also important, is understanding the stones that you set and you walked over and where you are today, because again, it just throttles you even harder into the future.
So I built one of those, something close to that. It was more like a chart, you know, a freaking topic and then lines and, anyway. But I put it on my wall at my old apartment, and one of my roommate's friends came up and he looked at that. He's like, "What the hell is that?" Like, I'm like, "Dude," I'm like, "It's my goals, man." He's like, "That is freaking smart." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Where'd you find out?" I'm like, "Hey, man, I listened to some podcasts and stuff." But that's
Yeah,
funny.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Going back to the specific point that you made about writing shit down, we keep everything in our head. Like it becomes real when we start writing it down, right? It becomes real when it's physical in front of us. And actually, I don't know the exact statistic off of it, but you're more likely to succeed if you actually share those things with your friends, because it builds accountability. And now you're worried about, fuck, what are other people going to think if I don't hit these things or get these things done that I told people, right? And I talk a lot about like judgment and fading that out in the noise of like critics, but there is a lot of truth in actually writing it down and telling people that you're going to do it, and then actually striving for it and getting it done, right?
Right. Yeah. So off of the podcast, I'm curious on the next accomplishment that you want to like achieve. Like what is the next milestone? Like do different, like I don't know. You can take it anywhere.
Yeah. So for me, it's pushing out more video content. So I have a lot of people that are visual people beyond just the podcast. And I think it's being really thoughtful around different forms of media. So I, started YouTube. I haven't thrown content on there, but the idea is actually to push out more video content. I mean, I actually built this studio. This was a basement before, and the whole purpose of this was actually to do videos. So it's YouTube getting more of video stuff going. TikTok has been blowing up, love it or hate it. It's kind of irrelevant at the end of the day. It's been very massive beyond your 16-year-old demographic. So I threw up just to test out the algorithm because I was really curious. I threw up like a cat video. I was working and I like throw the phone over the top of my computer, and she looked high as shit, and it got over 500,000 views, and it just like blew up. And I was like, okay, there's something here. So I want to do, how I do 1, 2, 3, 4, like, or 5 punch lists on the podcast. I want to do that in short form. The idea is to do that in shorter form on TikTok. And then the idea on YouTube is actually to take full scale 20-minute episodes, push those out on YouTube. Right. And then thirdly is bringing on more people onto the podcast, segueing into 2021.
That's sweet. Now, off the topic of video, man, these lights, man, it was a kit for like $42, man. It's amazing. Like you can make your studio look great for like almost pennies.
It's crazy. Yeah, I have oh my God. I have a ton of lights in the studio, like from front to back. They're on 4 different switches, so I can turn and toggle. And then there's track lights over here, and then I actually have studio lights to my left and right, because you can kind of see this yellow, but you can also see this like blue. That blue is actually coming from studio lights, and they're fucking massive. Yeah, and I think the other thing is I'd love to explore more of this vlogging world. So, I got a new camera. It's pretty badass. I took it up to Acadia a few weeks back, and I had about 3 hours of video on there. And, it's funny too. I had a woman that reached out to me actually from the Philippines. I did a one-on-one session with her, and she literally said, listen, I edit video. That's what I do. She goes, you've brought me so much value from the podcast that I'll literally edit video for you for free. Sweet. Like, just send it to me. And I guess that was, and being honest with myself and even your listeners, that was the one thing that was holding me back, was that I just don't have the bandwidth, right? So at one company that I have part ownership in, I'm a VP of sales over there. And then I actually started another company back in April, a SaaS company. So and then I have the podcast. So I have three major things going on in my life. And it's, and I think that's where I spend a lot of my time is how do I balance these three things, because I got a lot going on. And I also need to be honest with myself, because I know how crazy my fucking mind is. It would be 100% in every category. And I know at the end of the day, that's just not practical. So,
Right. Yeah, video editing is something else, especially when you're just about to export it and it's like, sorry, man, you have no disk space or something goes wrong. It's
yeah,
horrible.
yeah, yeah. I felt that I actually did graphic design, and I mean, back then you were using a lot of external hard drives over everything. There wasn't this like cloud storage, and oh, I can't tell you how many times. Actually, my hard drive crashed on one of my Macs before. I mean, yeah, I've been there, done that. That is not a fun area to be stuck in for sure. I can only imagine it with video.
Exactly. I don't know. I do like photos and videos for bands at concerts and stuff. And
Hmm.
like the video thing is the one thing I'm like, do I want to step in that? Because
Yeah,
like
it's a
it,
whole world.
it's a whole different thing. And
Hmm.
especially like, I don't know, you just gotta account for the time that
Oh
people
yeah.
don't see again.
Yeah. 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 Again, it's one of those things, right? What we were talking about earlier, 7 pages of content for 20 minutes of audio content. Okay. Video, you're talking probably hours of footage for maybe 10 minutes of a clip. So
Right.
yeah, it was something I've been really thoughtful about, but that's where I'm really heading with the podcast.
That's sweet.
Yeah. And again, I think it's continuing to, the other thing about beyond interviews is actually getting on other podcasts too, right? Being able to build the name just beyond my audience.
Exactly. Now, I've always been curious about this. Do you one shot record and do the whole thing?
Yep.
Holy crap.
Yep. Yep. So again, it comes down to I fuck up when doing the podcast. And I know that, and I do it on purpose. I don't fuck up on purpose. I leave it on purpose
Yeah.
because I want it to feel real. And it's funny because I would say one of the most consistent pieces of feedback that I get from people, whether they shoot me a DM on Instagram or Facebook, is literally like, I feel like I'm in the room with a mentor or a coach or my best buddy that's literally like, straighten the fuck up and get your shit together. You've got this. And
Yeah.
people like that realness. It's actually one of the reasons why I have been a little cautious around interviews, because there is a if you do it, the wrong way, is that it doesn't feel
Yeah. Yeah.
natural like we have going on here. And I
Right.
don't want my listeners to lose that authenticity and that realness, right? If they feel like when they're driving along that I'm in the passenger seat with them, I don't want them to lose that experience. And that's why I
Right.
try not to like fancy it up too much. And I'll continue to do things like refine my intro, outro, segue, things like that, and sponsors and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the content feels real. So yeah, it's a one straight shot through the entire thing. You have to remember too, after spending hours on 7 pages of content, I know how that shit's gonna flow. Like I feel it. I'm breathing it too, because the things that I'm preaching are things that I do. And
Right.
that's one thing that I'm very, very, very fucking keen on, is that if I'm gonna talk about it, I'm not going to bullshit about it. Like I'm not going to try to front or tell other people to do it if I'm not leveraging those things too as well. And I think my dad was a very old school dude, and God forbid you lied or said no to my mother. Like he was very, very structured. And as a kid I was like, fuck this guy. But as I grew older, of course I appreciate the hell out of my dad. um, and there was something that he really embedded in me at a young age, and that was just like authenticity and just being honest, being real. And so I just, in good conscience, I can't sit down and like type out something or then talk about something if it's not something that I'm doing.
Right.
It feels shitty to me. And I,
Yeah.
I know some people can do it, and hey, that's fine. That's their thing. It's just not mine.
There you go. Yeah. When I started my podcast, I'm like, I'm gonna trim this out. I keep going, or like, just something really, I don't know, just dumb, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what eventually after like, I think 5 episodes. I'm like, you know what is there to lose? Like, I
No.
spend so much time like editing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other thing. And I've said this before on the podcast, and I actually just dropped a video, just a quick video on Instagram last night. Nobody keeps a fucking logbook. Like, nobody's sitting there like,
yeah,
John
that's
fucked up
my
4 times on that episode. Like, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. Like, listen, yes, if you have shitty sound and like there have to be a lot of things to piss a lot of people off to like dip out of listening to a podcast. Don't get me wrong. You're going to have those picky people, right? You know, I've had someone that reached out before to me over like breathing better or something on the podcast in front of the mic. And I'm just like, no, I took it. I want honesty from people. So I was like, hey, I appreciate the fact that you gave me some feedback. I'll certainly work on it. Not something that I realized. I appreciate it. And at the end of the day, that's fine. I welcome that 1-star or the 5-star review. But again, majority, 99.99% of people don't give a shit. You know, like this
exactly.
isn't, you know, like we make it this big thing in our head, and we make it so big that it's like, well, no, it can't be the other way. And it's like, no, that's literally how it is. When's the last time you listened to a podcast or you watched a video and someone like, I don't know, said something wrong and you were like, oh, never watching this dude again? Like, it just doesn't fucking happen most cases. So we build it up and hype it up so much in our heads. So yeah, it's one and done for me.
I think that's my favorite quote from you. Like the logbook. That's the one thing I always, because you say it a few times in different episodes. I'm like, this is like the quote. But
yeah. I'm a big fan of quotes and more so analogies for sure.
There we go. I'm trying to see if I got one last question here.
No worries.
Do I not? No, I don't. Oh, see, this is why you don't go off the list.
No worries, man. Anything you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about. I'm an open book. I love talking to people. I love exploring. I just working off that little, like, being the perfectionist type thing with stuff. You never get it out, right? So
right.
it kind of plays into this idea of, if you're developing something, let's say a product, and before launch, you continue to refine, you're moving the goalpost further and further away. That also gives most people an excuse not to do something, right? So I actually had a one-on-one session with someone that's like, hey, I love doing video. I'm like, oh, awesome. But at the same time, I was like, so how much content do you push out? 1 video every 3 months. And I'm like, wait, I thought that you liked doing video. And where I really got with her and IDSing it, actually identifying, discussing, and solving what the hell it was, is that she was super nervous about what other people thought of her on video. And so what happened is she was afraid of the judgment. And that judgment at the end of the day was actually what pushed her from not doing the video at all, actually chasing her dreams. That shit is so sad to me and hits down at my core, because I always think of it this way. And maybe this is a bad example for, all of your listeners that are wicked into music, but like, if Rihanna or Michael Jackson actually gave a shit, or Prince, as to what the fuck the world thought about them and their music, we would have never experienced them. And that was bad, actually, putting Rihanna with like Michael Jackson or Prince. But like, my point is that they would have never came out, right? They would have, the world would have never experienced what they had to offer. And so my thinking is going back to the, a million milestone. Did I just inspire someone that's going to be the next Prince or the next Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah.
Like, I have no clue, but that shit gives me chills at the end of the day. And that shit ignites the living fuck out of me. Like, that stuff just gets me so amped up. And I've had people too. I've had people that are, writing a book, developing an app, working on a company, doing, started their own podcast. I mean, the list goes on. And it's so funny because people are like, 6 years from now, I'm going to reach out to you. And I'm like, hell yeah, like, absolutely reach out to me. Like, tell me, I want you to literally tell me what you've accomplished, because that's always something in the back of my head that I'm like super curious about, is what I always say, action over words, right? We were talking about goals earlier, actually going out there and doing that thing that you said you were going to do, that shit fires me up. And then it fires me up to for people to say, I was so fearful and nervous about this thing, and I just did it, and my whole
Right.
life has changed. And that I can't express it enough. Like, that shit really, really gets to my core and really excites me immensely.
It's crazy though. Like me myself, like I hated my, like, you know how you are, like you hate your own voice, right?
Yeah.
You just hate being on camera.
100%. Yeah.
I was like, one day I went to Target. I bought one of those snowball microphones, the really bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm gonna start a podcast, and I remember one of my friends being like, "What the hell are you talking about, man?" Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
It's I that's another piece of fuel too, is when, I mean, little different of a story, but when people just doubt you
yeah,
for being able to accomplish anything. Because I think of all of the amazingly talented musicians out there, business leaders in general, whatever, that probably were told like 9,999 times that you're fucking crazy. Everything's crazy until
until
someone
you,
does it,
yeah,
right?
until someone
Then all
does
of
it.
a sudden it becomes the norm, right? It was crazy to start the biggest e-commerce company. It was crazy to start Apple and charge people up the ass for phones, right? These things are all crazy. It was crazy to develop an electric car. Now look who's laughing, right?
Right,
And like,
right. Until people
Elon's
are
sitting on
like,
his
"Hey,
electric
man."
fucking chair laughing at everybody to the bank. And so that's the part that I'm like, everything's crazy or sounds really ridiculous until someone actually goes out there and truly
Does it.
accomplishes and
Right.
follows through with their aspirations. And that just fires me up, because I know at the end of the day, everybody has it. I've interacted with people and they're like, I just don't have that thing. And I'm like, that's bullshit. You do have it. The issue is that it's this cave that's been buried for a little bit. The cave's still there. It's functional. The entrance is just a little blocked. So
Right.
what we're going to do is we're going to try to break through to the entrance so we get some light back in that cave. And I think deep down, everybody actually has it. Maybe not everybody is as energetic as us or something like that, but deep down inside, everybody has it. And the opportunity is to expose it, and then a continual practice around it. And I think, the other thing off that too, as well, is people just look for this shit to happen overnight. Like,
Right.
podcasts don't blow up. Businesses don't blow up overnight. You, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, they're highlight reels that you see.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No,
just like a trailer to a movie, you're going to see some of the stuff that's going to excite you to go watch the movie. But that's all you're going to see. You're not going to see any of the shitty spots in the movie. It's the
yeah,
same
the
thing in
filler.
life. Right. So, what I really, really want to do is highlight that it's all not rainbows and fucking unicorns in life. But that's not a bad thing. It's all how you digest that information. Right. And so, yeah, I just going off on a tangent on that one, but I think that
No,
that's so
you're good.
key.
So so I've listened to like at least 3/4 of the podcast. So
Mm,
recently, like a month ago, I was like, I wonder what this guy is actually about. So I went on the Instagram,
mhm.
and I thought it was the coolest thing that you like left your phone number. Like not a lot of people
Oh, yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Dude, what's funny? I had so many of my friends that DM'd me and was like, "I can't believe you just did that." And actually my phone did blow up. And still to this day, because people stumble on that episode, call me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have it on Instagram where you can just call me, but yeah, I have people all the time still text me and said, "Hey, this is Sarah, listen to the podcast. Can't believe you gave out your number. Hey, I'm going through this." And part of it is crazy, but part of it's not really crazy, because
Right.
I always think about it in, there's a classic saying like, be someone you needed in dark times. And that's how I always, always, always think. Like, I actually had a woman that reached out to me, went to high school with her. And
Yep.
she was like, "Hey, I know we haven't talked in a long time, but I have a team of 15, and I'm just trying to figure out how I could really motivate them. So I don't know if you offer any like group sessions or webinars or anything like that." And I said, "Well, let's hop on the phone before we just jump to those things." And what we were able to get down is, I'm like, "Listen, I'm not trying to make a quick buck here. I think that we need to analyze this and look at this completely different. And we're able to walk away from that. And she's like, I just need to be more personal and have more of a personal connection with my team and really get down to the details. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just about doing good, being a good fucking person. This world has we see
Downers,
more
man.
of
So
the
many downers.
right, especially with COVID and like election shit going on and all this other stuff. First of all, I try really, really hard, like I alluded to earlier, to completely eradicate that from my life. So I think your mind is just like your stomach. Put good food into it, you're going to be pretty healthy. If you put shitty stuff into your mind, probably going to have a shitty mind. So the idea for me all the time is I think about my mind as my stomach. Put good thoughts into it, good information into it. I'm going to get good stuff out in return. And then I want to share that with the world. And if that means putting my number, on the podcast for people to reach out, fuck it. If I help out someone, that's what I really care about at the end of the day.
There it is. Word up. Well, we got it. We
love it.
Hell yeah. Well, we'll schedule one of these, like, I don't know, a year from now. We'll see where we're at.
Hell yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on.
I learned a bunch, and I'll check out more of your episodes when you upload them, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, man. And I'm thankful that you listen and